Good evening. Welcome to the meeting of the Cunningham Township Board for Monday, November 6th, 2017. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Trustees Ammons, Brown.
Here.
Jacobson.
Here.
Hazen.
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Wu.
Here.
Roberts.
Here.
Chair Marlin.
Here. Next up is public participation. Does anyone wish to address the Cunningham Township Board? Okay, seeing none. Moving on to minutes of the previous meeting. That would be the October 2nd, 2017 meeting. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved. I'll second.
Moved by Jared, seconded by Dennis. Are there any corrections? All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Okay, that's passed. Committee to verify bills. Danielle?
Yeah, so what you'll see is that you have a town fund expenditures for the month of October of $81,256.70, higher than usual because we did our first disbursements for social services. So most of that difference is social services disbursements. General Assistance Fund, we had $27,210.99 in expenditures. So I just ask for a motion for approval.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we approve the town fund and the general fund.
I'll second it.
Moved by Dennis, seconded by Dean. Any further discussion? Will the all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. That motion passes. Reports of officers.
So just wanted to give assistance statistics as of November 2nd. So our general assistance participants are at 49 people, up from 40 last month. 14 of those participate in community workfare, 8 are senior citizens, 60 years and over, and 28 are applying for disability. And we have 3 others who are in the process of helping. Anyone who's not included in there is generally in the process of applying or has a temporary medical issue. The average age of our participants is 49 years old. We had 1 recent termination. That person got Social Security, which is always a good sign. We have 19 pending applications. That's pretty high. It's up from 11 this last month. We are seeing more walk-ins, especially as it gets colder. We have 56 advocacy clients. Those are folks who do not receive general assistance, but we provide some level of support for them. That's up from 39 people last month. I did a count of homeless clients, and I'd like to keep a running count for you. I think that's an important piece. So we have 24 homeless clients. By homeless, I'm using the HUD definition of homeless. So essentially what our continuum of care. So someone may be on the street, they may be in precarious housing, or they've had to move several times recently, living in cars, or folks who are about to be evicted. If they have a 5-day notice, they're considered homeless. A 5-day notice with no place to go. So essentially, about 1/5 of our clients are homeless. I've also started to keep a gender count. I find this a little bit interesting that we have 10 homeless male clients and 14 females, so we have more women than men. And I'd like to reach out to the continuum of care and see if that's a common situation, because I think female homeless clients might be more invisible in some ways than the male clients. Our total active clients is 124. We feel really comfortable with that amount. We still have capacity to add folks. A lot of the work we're doing is infrastructure building. So we're hoping by the end of the year that infrastructure is in place so our staff time can really be focused, instead of training on new case management system, focused on being able to support our client base. I have a couple of announcements. We have a winter coat drive, which has already started, and we're asking folks, particularly right now, we could really use drop-offs. We're looking for donations. You can drop them off at Cunningham Township anytime 9 to 12 or 1 to 4. We are looking for clean and gently used warm winter items of all kinds: coats, sweatshirts, hats, gloves, scarves, boots, sweaters, throw blankets. We have both adults and children who come in, and so both kinds of sizes are welcome. So if you're looking to clean out your closet, feel free to wash them and bring them to Cunningham Township, and folks will essentially just walk in and can go shopping for free for what's there. This has been a multi-year commitment of the township to provide this. I think the last thing is just you all are Cunningham Township, your township officials of Illinois. We paid our dues. That was on the last bills. And there's a conference that is coming up November 12th through the 14th in Springfield. I will be there at that conference, as will my compatriot, City of Champaign Township Supervisor. And if you're interested in attending, or you have questions about that, I'm happy to help facilitate that. That's it for now.
Any questions for Danielle? Okay, thanks. Next on to unfinished business. Apparently none. New business. First up is resolution number T 2017-11-007R, which is the resolution determining the amounts of money necessary to be raised by the tax levy for the tax year 2017.
Okay, so the proposal is fairly pedestrian, which is essentially to keep the levy exactly as it has been. The primary reason is because there's a change in administration, both myself and the assessor, and I think the most important step we could take now is a year of assessment. So I'd like to see how the caseload levels out now that we've reduced some of the barriers to lawful access to GA. It's really unclear what the future status of the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid will be. If medical insurance support for low-income households is reduced, the township will very likely experience a spike in medical payments. We kept the grant level, as you recall, at $265 per month. That's not kept up with inflation. It would be closer to about $290 had it kept up with inflation since 1990. I think we need to assess what increase we could provide next year. I generally think we should do an increase each year. But again, I'm kind of in a wait-and-see moment. I was happy to match the City of Champaign Township's allocation. They raised and we stayed the same. So we're talking about maybe stepping up together next year. We are launching new programs, as you know, such as the education and employment track within our general assistance. We're also launching an emergency assistance program. And I would like to assess demand and impact for Urbana residents. And lastly, and this is a piece I think will involve your participation, is I'm currently working on a strategic plan for the township. I think all organizations need long-term planning, and I think we need to really understand the unique position of township within the local support ecosystem, so we're not duplicating things and we kind of fit in our place. We also need to do some capital improvements planning because there's no money set aside for capital improvements. So there's I'd like to essentially bring a strategic plan before you kind of as an informational piece and to get your input. And I think that plan will help us make decisions about budgeting, including any changes to the levy going forward. Lastly, if we were to reduce the levy prematurely and find out we need to raise it again, we may be limited by tax caps on how much we raise it. I don't think that's the primary concern, but it's just something for us to keep in mind. So essentially today, you're putting the resolution, you would be passing a resolution to put this levy on file. And so next month in December, you would do the final vote. And essentially that gives the public an opportunity to comment on the tax levy. Any questions?
We have a motion. We have a motion first before discussion.
So moved.
Okay, moved by Aaron.
I'll
Second.
second. Go ahead.
I'll
Who
second.
had the second?
Jared.
Jared? Okay. Questions?
So I was just curious what unique individuals means as referenced on page 2, where it says 111 unique individuals, 125 unique individuals.
Oh, this is about the grant, which is the next agenda item?
That's the next one, okay.
Yeah, so I'm
All right.
happy to answer that. And actually, Cheryl's from Faith United Methodist Church is with us, and she'll be presenting briefly, and then we can answer questions.
I jumped ahead, sorry.
That's
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Discussion? Okay. Does this require all those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign.
Tax levy one?
Yes.
Roll call,
It's just the resolution. Yes,
even though it's a resolution?
yeah.
Okay. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Trustee Ammons?
Yes.
Brown?
Yes.
Hazen?
Yes.
Jacobson?
Yes.
Miller?
Yes.
Roberts?
Yes.
Wu?
Yes.
That motion passes. Next up is resolution number T 2017-11-008R, which is the resolution approving and authorizing an agreement concerning disposition and use of funds dispersed through the Cunningham Township fiscal year 2017-18.
Thank you.
Men's Emergency Shelter.
So I'll present a short report on this piece, and I'd like to invite Cheryl Palmer, if you'd like to come up. I think it's Reverend Dr. Cheryl Palmer from Faith United Methodist Church, and I'll pass it to the Reverend to speak a little bit about the specifics and answer any questions you have about CU Men's Emergency Shelter. I do think I wanted to bracket this with a short history lesson. I think it's important for us to understand kind of where we are in the place in where homeless services exist in town. And I did a kind of research project over the last month in preparation for this, looking at what shelter services has looked like since the 70s. Champaign-Urbana has been very forward-thinking in terms of its shelter services, and you all may recall that A Woman's Place was the first battered woman shelter opened in Illinois. It was opened here in Urbana in 1971. That was a volunteer collective that did that. And since then, there's been bumps in the road, but generally we've seen that shelters have progressed from grassroots initiatives in basements, like the McKinley Foundation had a basement shelter for a number of years, to a kind of above-ground mix of emergency and transitional shelters with government funding. There has been some contention over whether or not to fund emergency shelters, so we've seen a pullback from the federal government over the decades away from emergency and more towards transitional. So that's one of the pieces that I think is in play here. Despite that, we've typically been able to sustain an emergency shelter, oftentimes from local funding. Even if it wasn't enough beds, we've had that emergency men's shelter. It was considered a level 1 transitional shelter at the Time Center. We had shelter at Salvation Army, we had shelter at Restoration Urban Ministries, and we had Courage Connection shelter. We also, since 2008, have had Austin's Place, which is a volunteer effort to provide shelter for up to 6 women at a time, just in the winter months. I think 2016 was a really critical year. We saw a budget crisis on the state level, and there were some changes on the federal level. Community Elements closed Roundhouse Shelter for Youth, so we don't have a current place for homeless youth in town. We saw the closing of 50 beds in the level 1 shelter at the Time Center. That was a real loss. It actually went from 50 to 25 and then 25 to nothing over the course of 2 years. The Times Meal Service also disappeared. Salvation Army and Men's Shelter also closed for financial reasons. The last 2 winters have been a kind of a terrible situation for the homeless in Champaign-Urbana. Courage Connection, which is a shelter for women, was imperiled by state budget issues, and although it survived, it now only serves victims of domestic violence. And I wanted to be clear about that, because even as a community member for a number of years, I had an understanding that there was more shelter for women. There is essentially no emergency shelter for women in this community who are not victims of domestic violence. which in the case of the folks I'm working with, and I'll speak to that in a moment, that's all of them. They don't have domestic violence. They're economic refugees, so to speak. They're dealing with other kinds of issues, mental health or simply medical issues that they have faced. And so that's a real gap that exists. Now, the faith-based community, as that kind of nonprofit infrastructure withered in 2016, the faith-based community has really stepped up. That said, I think there's been limited capacity. So last year, with support from the United Way, and I want to add $18,000 from the city of Champaign, essentially there was provisional shelters in 3 different locations. But it started January 6th, and I don't know if you recall last winter, but December was actually the coldest month of the year, not January or February. So December was really a bitter time, and there was no emergency shelter for men, and there was only emergency shelter for women half of that month. So they served about 22 men a night, or 111 total, and kind of getting into the shelter, you had to go to a place and get picked up. You couldn't just show up to the location because it was constantly changing. This year, CU Men's, we're lucky to have CU Men's Emergency Shelter. They formed as a 501c3 not-for-profit, and they're operated in part by the Faith United Methodist Church, and it's going to be located at the New Covenant Church, and I'll let you share some of the details of that. But essentially, the initial vision was that that would be open December 1st through March 31st. And unfortunately, as you can tell if you go outside right now, we're already in the cold season. We've already seen freezing cold weather. This last January, our Continuum of Care, which is a consortium of the different social service providers, including the Township, surveyed 10 locations. So it was a limited survey. It didn't include folks who may be doubled up in homes, and it may have not been able to find the folks sleeping in parks. But essentially, there were 188 homeless individuals counted, up from 163 the year before, with the same survey methods. Cunningham Township currently has 24 clients, as I explained, who are homeless. I want to just illustrate what that looks like a little bit. It includes an 18-year-old couple and their dog who were sleeping in the park and recently moved on to a stranger's porch. I see them every day. We usually call, most of our homeless clients, we're calling them every 2 to 3 days to check in with them. There were 2 men recently evicted, and they've basically been couch surfing and doing some late night steak and shake and Mary Ann's Diner. And then there's one woman who came in last Friday who we've been working with who actually slept outside. And as you know, it was below freezing that night. And she came in just kind of, she was finished. She was like, I can't do this anymore. I need help. There's another woman we're working with who's sleeping in a garage with no heat. There's one woman with mental health issues we've been working with for a while who actually has gone missing, and we filed a missing persons report with Urbana Police, and hopefully we will find where she is. The others generally have temporary precarious housing with family or friends. They're not necessarily on the streets, but there's always that risk. I do want to mention, and it was very sad to read at the News Gazette that we had a 60-year-old senior citizen, Jeffrey Gray was the name listed at the News Gazette. He was homeless and he passed away on Grigg Street yesterday. And the coroner is looking into the cause of death. I don't know if the elements is a part of that or not, but I think certainly people have a better chance of survival if they have shelter. Earlier this year, a man staying in an RV here in Urbana, he was at Green and Anderson, was severely burned when he tried to light a propane heater to warm up. So I think, with a fifth of Cunningham Township's client base homeless, and with waiting lists for transitional housing running about 3 to 6 weeks, I just met with Carrie, who runs centralized intake, which I think is a great system that we put in place, but we simply don't have enough places to house people. So we can do the intake, but we don't have enough places. So 3 to 6 weeks in the winter months could really be a life or death situation. So I consider it a public safety imperative. I really beseech you as a city council, not only as a town board, to think about the public safety implications of homelessness and what the city may be able to do. I'm asking the same of the city of Champaign and city of Champaign Township. And I do know that the city stepped up last year. What we're proposing is $12,500 from the township as a mid-year grant out of our social service funding through a different process, obviously. That is the amount that CU Men's Emergency Shelter indicated to us and showed us what their budget is, about a month of expenses. And so we have asked them, can you stay open an additional month? And with this, they will be able to open before Thanksgiving, which would be great, November 20th, and stay open through April 14th. So that's a whole month in addition. Still, I think what we need is year-round shelter, obviously. We also need affordable housing so people aren't stuck in shelters, but that is for another day for us to discuss. Okay, so I do want to mention this is already in the budget. It includes $20,000 for additional services, and as you saw in the budget note, specifically we wanted to look at community initiatives to address poverty. And what we said is we'll work with the Champaign County Continuum of Care and Council of Service Providers to the Homeless to identify gaps needing support as we enter the winter season. So you got a heads up that this might be coming. And after you may ask, what about the women? I think that's a really important question to ask. We have approached Austin's Place. I'm speaking with the leads this week on that, about whether additional funds would allow them to open for a longer season. So you may see something coming back to you. I think it would make sense for us to fund both. And then I think next year what we'd like is to steer folks into the consolidated social services process. I think just because the community has been in the scramble mode, and there's also been a misunderstanding, I think, about whether or not faith-based groups can be funded through consolidated social services. So those two things together, I think, means that we're kind of coming right before the winter to you and asking for a special grant. In your packet, you will see an application. Looks very similar to what you've seen. And an agreement, a draft agreement with CU Men's Emergency Shelter. So I'm asking for your approval for this. I'd like to pass it over to Reverend Dr. Cheryl Palmer.
Well, thank you very much. I don't have a great deal to add. Danielle has done a fantastic job. We are working very hard to not be flying by the seat of our pants as we did last year, and are on target and could open November 20th with additional funding. If not, we will be ready to go December 1st. We are thrilled that it's going to be in one facility throughout the entire time, closer to downtown. And we have hired staff who will run the facility, much like last year, allowing us to be a damp shelter, which means individuals can come in under the influence. They can't use or partake while they're in the shelter, but we do not require them to blow or anything. We just want to get them off the streets and out of the hospitals, and particularly not sent to jail. So that is our goal. We are very excited about the community effort to work together. Champaign was very helpful in getting New Covenant Fellowship to fire code so that we could house them there, and I have also approved the early open and extend if we can secure the extra money. So, happy to answer any questions or give you any more details. I don't want to belabor the point, but happy to help out any way we can.
Bill?
Yeah, maybe I missed it. Is this a nighttime only shelter?
Yes,
So they'd
yes.
have to leave in the morning? at some
They
point
sure
and come
do.
back?
They come in at 9:30 and leave at 6:30. That's mostly that's because of funding, because we do staff it. Any additional hours requires more money, and we're hiring 4 full-time men and 1 part-time man. Happy to share that one of the men that we hired at the end of last year and again this year used the shelter last year. So we're very excited about that, and he has been secured and is ready to work.
And then Austin's place is that at the United Methodist?
That's at First United
First United.
Methodist Church downtown, and we are
Okay.
working very closely with them. Their difference for them is that they use all volunteers.
I think the main issue with government funding faith-based organizations is if you have a requirement that they participate in any sort of faith activities in order to get
Absolutely not.
services.
No, we don't even ask them their faith. And we've, in fact, we've been working very hard for this to be an interfaith organization. The synagogue is already providing volunteers to help us out, but no, we bring them in, we give them something to eat, we get them to bed, we keep them warm, and we send them out the next morning.
Okay, thanks.
So
And
thank you
thanks,
for asking.
Danielle, for anticipating all of our other questions.
Aaron?
So thank you, Danielle, it was a great job presenting, and thank you, Reverend, for all the work that you all are doing to make sure people have someplace safe to go when it's cold outside. My thought is, with the additional funding, I'm up at about 5 o'clock every morning. It's still pretty cold at 6. Just a thought.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to staying open all the way until April, which it starts to warm up in
Mhm.
April, would there be a way for individuals to stay till 8 a.m., 9 a.m.,
We
as opposed to keeping the shelter open long? I'm just throwing something out there.
It's a great question, and my board meets tomorrow, and I'd be happy to consider that. In fact, it's very difficult to send them out in the morning. When we were at Faith last year, we had to drive them and basically drop them back off at the library, and it was painful. So if that's the wishes of this board, I think that would be a great thing for us to consider. And I can't guarantee it because I can't make that decision myself, but I would be happy to bring it to my board tomorrow.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve resolution number T 2017-11, or well, I guess we're not approving it, but sending it forward to the next town board meeting for approval.
Oh, this is approving.
Oh, this is approval?
Mhm.
Okay. Then I move for approval.
Second.
Moved by Jared, second by Aaron. Any further discussion? Bill?
I think we already approved the distribution of half of the money in our bills that we just approved before this, right? I saw a distribution of $6,250, so I think I will vote yes on this.
Mary Alice?
So I'm curious if the board thinks that Aaron's proposal is a good proposal, how does that impact this? Is this specifically for expanding it for the month, half a month before and half a month after? Maybe Danielle, could you answer that?
Yeah, so what we have in the agreement is that they would agree to open, that the thing that they're responsible for are the dates, November 20th to April 14th. Certainly, there's two options. One, we could look at additional funding that would have people out later in the morning and ask what that would cost. And the second would be to consider a revision to the contract, which actually we could make. I think there's a provision of like a 30-day cancellation. We could essentially in the middle of the contract revise it, so it won't keep them from opening now if we wanted to look at them closing earlier and staying open longer. So I'm happy to pursue that and report back. I think we never know how cold it's going to be in April, but initially what I had asked for was an open date of November 1st, and I understand it was just asking too much in terms of there were already a lot of logistics in play. So I was less thinking about the spring and more thinking, can we open earlier? So I think, I'd be open to seeing if we could do a shift. Maybe they close at the end of March and they have some more hours in the morning, because I think the Phoenix House doesn't open till maybe
I think it's 9.
8 or 9.
8 or
yeah.
9. Mhm.
And then the library also typically doesn't open till 9. So it's like Illinois Terminal might be one of the only places where folks can go if it's really freezing in the morning and it's 6:30. So, I mean, if, not to belabor the conversation, but if you all have a preference of more money versus less time, save money, less time, I'm open to hearing your thoughts about that.
Eric?
So I wouldn't presume to dictate to you what would be the best arrangement and the best use of the funds, but I'm very, very comfortable giving you and your board the discretion to make that kind of adjustment between the calendar dates at the end of the winter and the time of closing each morning.
I think there's a lot to be said for that. We'll need to crunch those numbers. I'll need to talk with the folks at New Covenant, but I would be surprised if we may have to do a little adjustment too with staff, although we've actually already hired one of the individuals on a part-time basis to come in the morning, and that person we might be able to extend. So I think it's a great idea, and it's something worth pursuing and considering, and the flexibility would help a great deal.
I had a procedural question for our attorney, and that was whether or not, if there was a change in the dates, which would be a change in the contract, would it need to come back to the town board? And it would. But we could do that in December if we want to explore and come back. I would probably want to go ahead and sign the contract so that we could disperse the funds so they could get started. But essentially, we could do a revised contract that supersedes the existing contract and changes the dates and talks about different open hours. So,
Dennis?
Yeah, I like that approach. It's good to get things started, but the option of having more time for people to spend at the shelter in the morning might be very very helpful to a lot of different people, and I think we ought to explore it. So yeah, if we can make an adjustment at our next meeting in December, that's fine. We can do that.
Okay. Mary Alice?
Can we make an amendment to allow for discretion between the end date and the operating hours at this time?
could they amend the agreement, since it hasn't been signed, to make it more open-ended?
You're talking about changing the dates, and you don't have an agreement for that. I think if you want to get this in operation at the intended time, I suggest that the best course is to approve this, and then it can be amended when you get more information as to exactly what they're willing to do, what the board's willing to do, and what it's going to cost to add funds or make any other changes. But approving it as it is what they need to be able to get started doing what you're asking.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds like a plan. Well, with no further discussion, will the clerk please call the roll?
Trustee Ammons?
Yes.
Brown?
Yes.
Hazen?
Yes.
Jacobson?
Yes.
Miller?
Yes.
Roberts?
Yes.
Wu?
Yes.
The motion passes. With no further business before the town board, the meeting is,
I'm sorry.
Yes.
One quick thing, I just wanted to give the Reverend an opportunity to ask for volunteers. Do you have volunteers that are needed? Because you are on a very well-watched public television station right now, so I just wanted to offer that if you needed.
Absolutely. We are looking for individuals to provide packaged snacks, drinks, to help with registration, and especially if we make this decision to stay open later. It's difficult to get volunteers at 6:30 in the morning. It might not be as difficult at 7 or 8 a.m. in the morning. So absolutely, and they can just contact our church at Faith United Methodist, and we will put them to work.
is there a phone number they should call?
217-359-3631.
Well, Aaron says he's up at 5 o'clock, so we'll move him over there.
We'd love to have you.
5 to 9 o'clock when they close.
All right, you got it.
He's writing campaign brochures.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No further business before this body. This meeting is adjourned.